Hi, I'm Michael Hartman.
I'm Naomi Liu.
And I'm Mike Rizzo. And this is OpsCast,
a podcast for marketing ops pros
and RevOps pros.
Created by the Mo Pros, the #1 community for marketing operations professionals.
Tune in to each episode as we chat with real professionals to help elevate you in your marketing operations career.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of OpsCast, brought to you by marketingops.com, powered by all those Mo Pros out there. I'm your host, Michael Hartman, joined today by nobody, at least not my co-host. I do have a guest. So joining me today is Chris Golec, a serial entrepreneur who is currently founder and CEO of Channel99, a company that leverages AI to help companies improve B2B marketing programs and invest in growth. Prior to Channel99, Chris has been active advising CEOs and marketing executives, investing in startups, and supporting various philanthropic organizations. Previously, he founded Demandbase to transform B2B advertising, marketing, and sales through innovations in digital technology and pioneered the ABM technology category. Prior to starting Demandbase, Chris founded Supplybase to help global manufacturers collaborate with their supply chain to bring new products to market. And before becoming a software entrepreneur, Chris held multiple sales, marketing, and engineering positions with GE, DuPont, and GM. So, Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Michael.
All right. Well, for our listeners, I nearly screwed it up too. So I'm glad we were able to make this happen. Get you on before Mopspalooza. We're recording this in early October 2024. So we're ready to go. All right. So lots of places we could start. You have a really interesting background. So why don't we start with this though? When you and I spoke, you told me a little about the kind of origin story and history of Demandbase. And something that was interesting to me that I hadn't heard was that you started the company, when you started it, was initially not focused on ABM. Your initial focus was going to be on something else. And you ended up you ended up pivoting to ABM for B2B businesses. Why don't you maybe tell a little bit about that story?
Sure. So, I've been a B2B guy for 30 years, since the late 90s, and back then, people thought B2B was bed and breakfast. So you really had to educate people. And we started a software company, me and a couple of guys from GE, called Supplybase. And it was all supply chain software. And as a marketer at that company, I was always very frustrated because all the technologies were focused on consumer marketing. And so we ended up selling Supplybase to a public company, which is now Blue Yonder. And after leaving that company, I really wanted to look at how do we help marketers manage their supply chain. So it was kind of like this supply chain idea for marketers. That's the initial concept of Demandbase. And it was just too early for that type of solution. So we kind of shifted Demandbase to focus on how do we fix B2B marketing? How do we build technologies to help B2B marketers reach the right accounts? That's what sales wants, and that's what they should get, right? And so that was launched in 2006, 2007, and it was a journey, right, of building ABM, creating the category, lots of different products, and fast forward to today, it's a big business, lots of players, but the opportunity to kind of revisit that platform to really help marketers understand what's working, what's not working, and how do I fix it, is still existed. And so that's why I started Channel99.
Oh, it's really interesting because I think my guess is when you say it was before its time is maybe like it was pre-COVID, right? Like I don't think anybody knew the term other than people who were in supply chain roles, right? Knew that term until COVID. Then the whole world knew about it. To the point, like
exactly.
My oldest son is in college, and he's studying finance and supply chain, right? So
that's right.
Like that's a good combination these days. Right? And hopefully we're not all going to be hearing that again. I haven't heard the whole dock workers thing in the East Coast and Gulf Coast. Let's fingers crossed. We don't need that again. Yeah, run on toilet paper. Okay, so one of the other things you and I talked about, and I think is surprisingly, we haven't had a ton of conversation about it here on our podcast, I'm sure it's coming though, is AI and its potential impact on marketing teams and marketing ops teams. So, yeah, how do you expect, things to be impacted within the marketing ops realm by AI technologies?
That's a good question. We're as marketers, we're all experiencing the opportunity to leverage AI to write blogs. Some are using it to create brand and creatives. It's pretty good at journalism, not as good as humans. It's pretty good at some graphics, but not as good as humans. But the reality is, you jump over into marketing ops, where you have vast amounts of data and interpretation. That's where I think the biggest opportunity for AI is to look at all that data and interpret questions of, where should I spend more or less, or how do I improve this campaign? I think that's a huge opportunity, and that's where we're focused, frankly. But there's a lot of things that have to happen first. You just don't plop AI on top of a data set and hope you're going to get all the answers.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because I would put myself squarely in the camp of skeptic maybe 6 to 9 months ago. And I think it was getting so much hype about, and at the end of the day, it was ChatGPT was the driver for the majority of what was coming out, that it was going to be a boon for content, or maybe a negative for those people who are in content, writing content. My sense is that that was an initial wave that sounded really good, but then when people really understood under the hood, like what were the potential pitfalls, like risk of exposing IP and things like that, that would sort of slow down. But I've thought similar to you that for a little while that the amount of data, like one of the limit, there's at least two limitations I've seen with the data that marketing ops and marketing teams have generated over the years, which is significant, is that I think there's a gap in the skill set. Right? I don't know that there's a lot of people within the profession that really have deep, or not even deep, but enough understanding of analysis, statistics, things like that, to be able to really do the kind of deep dive analysis that would be, I think, useful for a business. And then second, they were just, even if they did, right, there's limits on the time they could apply to it. So they would have to go down the path of like choosing scenarios or hypotheses and evaluating those, as opposed to seeing if something, like spending time digging through the data to see if there's like additional hypotheses or patterns that could be exposed. Like, I think, are you like, do you have a similar take on that? And is that why, like that the data is there? We just, like, the ability to really find, sort of discover patterns and things like that is really, I think, what I'm expecting to get out, the benefit I expect to get out of AI driven kind of technologies.
Yeah, I think, well, there's data challenges that I think have to be solved first for AI to be efficient and effective. Some of those relate to, what are all the account signals that are happening both on my website and off my website across the web? That direct channel that's coming to your website, what is the true source that's coming in? Because to me, any attribution system or any AI technology, if you're ignoring the largest source of traffic, you're not going to get the right answer. And so to me, solving for those things first is imperative to having a quality output from the AI. And I think to your question, marketers want the answer. They want to be told what to do, but they also want to understand why. Like, why is the AI making this recommendation? And is it just based on my data? Is it based on industry data? What are some of the inputs? So that's really important to integrate into any AI-based solution. The term,
so exposing what's happening in the black box.
Yeah, and the term copilot is probably the most overused term in AI land, but it is right. I mean, people want this tool to give them insights and information at scale that's very insightful that they maybe couldn't do on their own. But at the end of the day, they want to shape that response. And so making that all possible is really key.
Yeah. Oh no, I think I know some marketers who don't want to be given an answer because they don't like what the answer is telling them that they should be doing, right? They'd rather go with instinct a little bit.
Yeah. What's one of the things I've learned, Michael, just early in this journey is that a lot of marketers don't want to hear if something's not working, but they're happy to learn how to make improvements. Right? Like, yeah, it's almost the same thing, but you're kind of inverting it to make it a positive and improvement, versus, you're wasting 80% of your money. Like, who wants to hear that?
Right. Nobody wants to hear their baby's ugly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the first exposure I had to that, because my experience in marketing has really been more on the technical side, operations side, historically, even when I was doing some B2B or B2C stuff. But I remember I had a friend who at the time was a friend of my wife who had become the CMO at a large retailer that you find on corners of lots of places in the country. I'll leave it at that. You could probably figure out who it is. But I remember talking to her one time about what I saw at the time. This was when like paid search was coming around and web analytics were really coming into their own. And I was like, as somebody who's like really keen on data and insights and using that to inform and make, understand what's working, not working. So I think it's going to be really transformational and useful. And it was interesting to get her inputs. Like, I think she still felt like, I think her fear was that was going to suck all the like actual creativity and risk taking that might come with being in marketing, being in marketing. And so, like, I actually think there's a balance to strike there, right? Like, you need the data, right? Because you should want to know what's going to work. But at the same time, I feel like there's still room. You need to leave room for experimenting with stuff that may not even be measurable.
Sure. Well, and I would also say there's one of the things that we're finding, there's been a lot of solutions out there that aggregate data and put it into some nice charts. And then that's the offer. But they're not solving the problems of understanding why isn't this working? Yeah. And what should I do? And, a good example, one of the things that we're really focused on is, the effectiveness of a vendor channel sometimes is merely, it's all about who you're marketing or selling to.
Sure.
Yeah. That sounds really like a really simple statement, but I see it over and over and over. People are using the wrong vendors for the intended audience, or the audience that they've created it doesn't fit all these different vendors, and they should really segment it into 3. And all this stuff I'm seeing over and over again from customer to customer, and all this stuff is trainable in AI to make recommendations and give specific actions to drive the efficiency of all your vendors and channels. It's not about just killing this vendor because the numbers look bad. It's like, right. Why do they look bad first?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think the best marketers out there will be keen to understand what's working and not working. And I like that point about why, right? So with Channel99, you're going back to this challenge of marketing analytics. In terms of like, was there a particular trigger that led to you go like, oh, it's time to solve this problem? And I'm assuming there's like, you saw some sort of opportunity for it. Like, what was the origin story of that then?
Yeah. A lot of it was just, I was still running Demandbase. And, I worked with a lot of different CMOs and a lot of big enterprises, and they all shared similar frustration there. They have not just Demandbase as a vendor, but of course, lots of others, and everybody has their own KPIs. So it was hard to make sense of, different KPIs, including Demandbases. And I'm like, gosh, And so I was just polling a bunch of people, like, what if there was a platform that allowed you a true apples to apples comparison and did it in a way that it was more financially oriented, to tell you how to invest more
I like
or
that.
less. And well, believe me, I'm like CFOs, when I talk to them, they're like, this is beautiful. Like, I don't care about MQLs. I really don't. I just want to know how do we generate opportunities and what does it cost per opportunity? Because I can plan around that. I can't plan around MQLs because everybody keeps changing the definitions. And so that's when I really said, the market is now ready, and I want to ignore some of the learnings from kind of this world of attribution that I sometimes refer to as legacy attribution, that just relies on visits and touches. And, some people are paid on that, so I get it, but it's not predictive. And I, very intentionally hired the co-founder of Visible as our CTO, knowing that he probably shared some of the same frustrations as me, kind of building that solution.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, even in places where I've been, where I'd say across what would be the equivalent of revenue operations, right? So marketing and sales operations, and the leadership there was I think people were fairly comfortable with the definitions of the different, like, MQL, sales accepted lead, and so on, sales qualified, all the way down to pipeline opportunity. There were still nuances at this company that, like, even I was like, I'm missing something here, right? Right. So there was always, even on a regular basis, going back and going, like, how's this defined again? And how does it go from one stage to another? Because there was one particular sort of transition point where literally nothing changed for a couple of weeks because somebody was on vacation. And I was like, what? Wait a minute. This is like someone's manually reviewing these one at a time and making a determination. This one person, no backup. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, Michael, one of the things that, not to go backward in time, but I was always frustrated as a CEO at Demandbase. We had sales operations and marketing operations and operations and finance. And I would ask each person, how many customers do we have?
Like the most difficult question to answer at any company I've been.
Well, I would get 3 different answers, but the worst answer was always, well, what do you mean by that?
Hey everyone, Mike Rizzo here, CEO of MarketingOps.com and co-host of OpsCast. I've got a little secret to share with you, something that's been one of the best kept perks of our community until now. At MarketingOps.com, we've built a hiring program that's changing the game for marketing operations recruitment, and we're finally sharing it with the world. Our community is over 22,000 strong, and within that, we have over 4,400 members who are actively and passively seeking new opportunities. These are seasoned professionals with skills and experience spanning platforms like HubSpot, Pardot, Marketo, and so much more. Plus, we can help you fine-tune your outreach, targeting exactly the right candidates by region, years of experience, seniority level, or even agency experience. But here's the real cherry on top. When you hire through our program, your new team member gets a free membership or a virtual ticket to our annual conference. From day one, they're not just stepping into a new role, they're getting access to the training, networking, and support they need to hit the ground running. So if you're ready to unlock this incredible opportunity, it's time to let this secret out. Visit marketingops.com and find your next star teammate today. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep optimizing.
That's what I say. Like that, I've said this before, right? Like when I've been asked as an ops person to go, like, we want to send all our customers an email. I always sort of like, I get this, like, my body tenses up because I know what I have to ask is like, well, how do we want to define that? When you say customer, do you want So say we've got a company and in our database, we've got 100 people. Do you want all 100 people to get it? Or do you just want one person or a handful of people? Like, how do we determine that? That's if we can get down to the one company, right? Usually you also have examples of the obvious, like the IBMs, right? Where you have different variations of the name or something. And it is incredibly hard to answer that question at way too many places. I've only been one place where they actually put a lot of effort into cross-functionally, right? Sales, marketing, finance, and like I call it business operations, collectively to come up with common definitions. And so when they were pulling data, it would have been essentially like a CDP, right? But mostly driven by financial data. There was a lot of effort put into like, okay, this is how we define a customer, and I don't know that it's not necessarily a right definition, but it was one that everyone agreed to and understood what that definition was. And that was more important than the particulars of the definition.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, sorry, off on a tangent because I did, as soon as you said that, I had that same reaction, like, oh, I don't want to have that question.
Yes,
yeah. So Channel99, you've described it to me as AI-driven marketing investment decision platform. Break that down. What does that mean?
Yeah, no, good question. There's an attribution component to it, but I guess through examples, we wanted a system that could make recommendations not only about where to invest, but also where not to invest, but also how do I make improvements, and not just give the answers, but show people why based on results and their data and industry benchmarks and things like that. And so, if I want to increase my spend in LinkedIn 10K per month, what are the outcomes I can expect? Right?
Oh, so there's an element of predicting as well.
Yeah.
Like scenario building.
Exactly. Because, as I described earlier, a lot of these legacy attribution tools, are very much touch-based, first touch, last touch. From my vantage point, they're all wrong when it comes to predictive. And most of the world in B2C land has moved towards, incrementality testing and change of spend, a change of business outcome. In our world, you might think of that as pipeline. And so you got to be able to build that data to make predictive outcomes, but it's not going to be based on visits. It's going to be based on, hey, like the last 6 months, when you change this was the outcome. But you got to be able to do that across all vendors, all channels, or saturation curves. It gets a little bit more complex. The other thing I would say is, we really had to solve this world of the direct traffic and understanding what is the true source of that traffic. Is it organic social? Is it ads that people don't click on, but they come to my website direct? Or is it the content syndication? All this investment that's going in there. To me, if you don't unveil that source, all your numbers, all your dollar per visits, and all these things are going to be wrong. And we've shown that like view through attribution is 6 or 7 times that of click through, and so that effectively lowers your dollar per visit for a particular vendor by like 75%. And so it's going to give you a totally different answer unless you solve for that. And so that's one piece. The how we do predictive is another, and building a really robust account identification engine was another piece that we invested in early, because I knew that would be critical and be able to do it without third-party cookies and things.
So, well, a couple clarification things for me. So when I think you alluded to it, maybe I misunderstood, but you talked about traditional or most attribution models today are not, how they predict is different. Like my view is I don't think any of them are predictive. Most of them are backwards looking as opposed to like no predictive nature at all. Okay. So That's interesting. And then the other is like when I hear you describing this, like you didn't even mention AI really, right? So AI is just sort of a tool that enables some of this is the way I'm hearing it. But yeah, I think of I was going to say scientific method, but really I think it's more like economic analysis, right? So um, you're not doing because I think of scientific method. You can you basically control everything except for one variable, more or less, right? Right. What A/B testing should be, but what if I understand right? Economic analysis is more about like you've got a whole bunch of variables that have variability, and you're trying to find like what are the ones that actually are predictive or influence on whatever the outcome is you're trying to do by holding like trying to eliminate the impact of the others. Is that kind of what you're talking about doing?
Exactly. So imagine a world where you're a platform that's connected to all your media platforms. So, Google, Reddit, Microsoft, all these different vendors and channels, and it's constantly logging changes of spend and to your CRM system and changes of business outcomes. So this huge, messy database.
Sure.
But then you layer AI on top of it. It can then trigger alerts around performance. It can answer questions like, hey, what were the 3 changes we made back in Q2 that had the biggest pipeline impact in Q4? Like that would take somebody like, that's a science project. Right? And so that's
what my experience with that be is like, even if they could do it once, the immediate thing would be, hey, there's something in here. Could you go like dig into that particular piece of it? Right. So it wouldn't be just a one-time thing. It would be like, it would take 2, 3, 4 iterations to even get to something who has time to do that?
Yeah. And so the world of sucking in all this data from all these vendors, unifying in an account-centric world based on actual results, not what they're telling you necessarily, because they're always going to be different. You're going to get a totally different answer. And you're right in your assessment of, AI is the thing you kind of layer on top of all this once you get it together. And that's why I have this whole 5-step thing that we've gone through. Step 5 is where we're going with the AI. And, think of training AI based on marketing white papers, but also playbooks. Like, how do I improve my LinkedIn campaign? We're training it on all these exercises.
Okay.
And think of it as we build our community of customers. Think of the AI getting smarter and smarter and smarter. It won't be perfect at first. We won't cover every kind of campaign improvement possible at first, but it's getting really, really great. Because I find myself, people naturally ask me, hey, Chris, I know, you worked at Demandbase, we have this Demandbase campaign. Is any ideas on how to make it better? And I find myself going through the same 4 or 5 steps in their instance of Channel99 and show them I would take these 120 companies out of the audience and use Facebook ads because they're generally too small for Demandbase to reach. And then Facebook gets better and Demandbase gets better and they didn't spend any more money, right? So there's a lot of things like that are surfacing, and we'll be diving into paid search and of course LinkedIn we mentioned a few times, but there's a lot of other platforms and programs.
Got it. You also mentioned that one of the things I couldn't tell if you can do or you are doing is pulling in some sort of benchmarks. How are you sourcing that? Is that going to be based on performance of things through your customer base? Is it through third party stuff? Was it a combination? What is that? What's that from?
Yeah. So think of, there's a bunch of ways we're doing it. Certainly KPIs and averages, but think of also 95th percentile, and you shouldn't make investment decisions hoping that you're going to be better than the 95th percentile. So there's always saturation curves by different vendors where the incremental benefit can get less and less. You may not be at that point. But all that stuff, most companies don't have enough data to understand where those points are. And so if we can kind of help build those through the collective of customers in a very anonymous way, it just gets better and better. And so it's a pretty exciting, pretty heavy math, as I think I mentioned to you kind of jokingly. It's like, this is more calculus. This is not algebra. So.
Right. Well, and I think one of the other things that it's popped in my head that actually ties back to the sort of calculus kind of model as well, or thought process is, traditional attribution modeling is looking for as much, like trying to build as much kind of almost a direct linkage between actions, activities that a customer prospect took to specific opportunities, right? Whereas I think what I'm hearing you is you're not trying to build that linkage, right? You're looking more at the outcomes. What are the inputs and activities kind of as well, and saying, based on that, like based on these activities or combination of activities that we did and how customers reacted to it, the downstream impact was this kind of revenue impact or pipeline impact, which can kind of, and one of the things that I think is a challenge, especially at like B2B companies where they have a long sales cycle, it's complicated, and it's a high value transaction, right? The time lag between some of the activities to when you see that the downstream benefit is really long, and like it tests patience that I think most places don't have. Are you like, is this helping to solve for some of that and kind of break that need to do that direct level of tracking?
Exactly. And it's important for me to say that, like, I'm not super anti like first touch, last touch, all that. I mean, we will have that data for people because some people, frankly, are paid on it, and so they need to understand it. All I'm suggesting is that, like, as you agreed, it's not predictive, and so while we'll have some of those models, I just don't know the benefit other than kind of understanding like what really initiated this deal was it a sales outreach, or was it an email, or was it they saw an ad and then
or they came to it. They came to a little dinner we did 2 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So keep going. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Sometimes how you present the data, people can see the patterns and understand, oh, this is what's happening with all the things that move into pipe quickly. Well, the AI doesn't need to see the patterns visually. They can interpret the patterns in the data. And so there's a lot to be learned. And, there's still a lot of companies that battle over, was this, sales generated or marketing generated. And I think any CEO would be frustrated over those battles, right? Because there's a role for both.
Yeah. So. I would think sales leaders and marketing leaders should be frustrated with it. Like I'm a big believer, like at the end of the day, like we should all be focused on getting the most value for the company, regardless of what our role is. And sometimes that means you need to give on something while your colleague does. It's interesting because I just talked to somebody yesterday, a younger person in his career who was asking for some kind of mentoring stuff. And we talked about attribution because I think my position about attribution is fairly well known, but like I'm not against it either. Right. But I also I would challenge leadership if they came to me and said, we need to get attribution reporting, because I'm like, I don't think you really do. Right. I think there are other ways you can demonstrate value. I think there's other better ways, like the opportunity cost of investing a bunch in all that may or may not be useful, especially given all the limitations we know about. At the same time, I think there's value in it if it's used in a way that makes sense with an audience that makes sense, right? Which is not the CEO and the C-suite or the board, right? That is not, they don't care. To your point, right? The CFO wants to know, like, are we going to generate more pipeline and revenue? That's what they care about. So again, I could go on a rant about that probably for a few minutes if I was let loose. All right. So, okay. So I know, so far, I don't know that any of this kind of stuff about the limitations or challenges with attribution modeling would be a surprise to our audience in marketing ops. What I suspect is many of them are maybe not as familiar with things like economic analysis and, and the things that go along with that kind of what you're describing is you're doing with Channel99. How can our audience think about this stuff, and apply to, let's be honest, a lot of marketing ops folks, I think, feel like they're not considered a strategic partner to the business, let alone just like marketing in general. And so, how can they use this kind of idea and insight and maybe help elevate their perception and add value to the company and be seen as strategic and start getting into those conversations with leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's different depending on the scale and sophistication of the company, because I think when you get to kind of larger enterprises, marketing ops is a lot more sophisticated and strategic, because a lot of the blocking and tackling around all the data and unifying it has been put in place. And so I do think, with, the advent of AI, I think it'll make marketing ops a lot more efficient and productive, and have a lot more they'll have a lot more insights into making recommendations on what to improve. And at the end of the day, hopefully the marketing performance increases, right? Like my cost per pipeline opportunity goes down. My customer acquisition cost is lowered. I mean, that's what everybody should be driving to. And I gotta believe, some of the more mid-market companies where marketing ops is spending an inordinate amount of time, like joining data and all this, and then they present to the CMO and they want it sliced a different way, and it's back to the drawing board, right? And I'm sure that's not very fun.
No.
To be in that position versus, you're coming to the meeting with a lot of great insights on what we should do next. Here are my top 3 recommendations for lowering customer acquisition cost from a marketing influence standpoint. That stuff is all possible. And so I think we're at the just very beginning stages of this.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I just heard 2 things that I think I want to make sure you tell me if I'm way off base here. So I don't mislead our audience, but I felt like I heard 2 things that were implicit in what you said that our audience should be thinking about. One is understanding I'll do it in 2 parts, right? Understanding how your company makes money, right? And then what are the drivers? What are the metrics that are drivers behind that? You mentioned cost per acquisition, cost per opportunity created, what are those metrics that are actually drivers for the business? So you need to understand those as opposed to visits, views, MQL. Those may be important too, but these other ones, when you're talking to other people outside of marketing, that you need to understand what they care about. That's the first part. The second part is, I think then, regardless of you using attribution, you're doing your own analysis, or you're using a tool like Channel99, right? You need to be able to understand what the data is telling so that you can interpret it in ways that you can then produce useful recommendations or insights. So those are the 2 things. To me, that comes down to understanding at least some basics about statistics and data analysis. Am I off base?
No, you're totally right. But I can guarantee you, if you go to the CFO and you say, hey, out of our customer acquisition cost, 50% is pipeline acquisition cost, he or she is going to listen.
Right.
And then the next question is going to be how do we fix that? That's way too high. They're going to say it's too high, even if it's average for most companies. Yep. And just in the world of B2B, there is just a lot of opportunity. B2B marketing, I always say this with part of the subsidy, it's hard. Most companies are only trying to reach 3 or 4% of the companies out there to buy their product or service. And most of the technologies being used are still kind of consumer tech. And so learning where to tweak the dial so you can really get it more pinpointed is really important. And there's just a lot of opportunity to keep on continuous improvements. And I will say that for paid search, but I'll also say it, ABM is supposed to be 100% focused on target accounts. It's not where it needs to be. And I also kind of say ABM, is it's a thought process, not necessarily just a technology, because some of the principles you should extend to all your vendors and channels, right? So.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so maybe one or so more questions, and we can wrap up. But you kind of mentioned, maybe that there might be some, additional capabilities, that sort of AI-driven capabilities that you're expecting to come into the marketplace and in Channel99. What are some of those things that you're thinking about that are going to be coming down the road?
Yeah, so I think it's, the sophistication and how good the LLMs are kind of trained to give you the answers and recommendations. And the more people that come into the community, and just more education, it gets better and better. So everybody kind of benefits as a whole. And, the more we extend our technology to different channels, whether that's, Reddit or Twitter and things like that, it'll learn how to make those things better. And so, I always look at this. I always come back to it depends who you're marketing or selling to. And if you break that down into a single account, if the AI can learn what's the most effective vendors and channels and mix to market to a single account,
right.
Then you have a world where you could upload a list of, let's say, 112 accounts and have it tell you exactly, what might be the most effective ways to reach and engage those companies. And of course, this is all nuanced by, do you have a high ASP product or low, and what in it, your industry and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're the latest in the line of people I've heard talking about how LLMs are going to make it so that we can do, sort of queries into data that are like based on the way we would actually ask questions, as opposed to here's how I'm going to have to do an SQL and join data and all that, right? You're going to ask it an open-ended question, and it's going to behind the scenes do some of that, right? And then it's up to you to, again, be able to understand and interpret the output.
Yeah, that's right. And that's interesting that you bring it up that way, because it was probably about 8 months to a year ago. The engineers were describing to me that, we're just training the LLMs to learn how to query the data. And I'm like, wait, let me understand a little bit more. And then so as I learn more about that, we started writing kind of the playbooks from which the LLMs learn from, and then query the data, come back with the answers, and really, really powerful. And it's just going to get better and better. But as I said earlier, if you don't have the underlying data kind of connected right, and you haven't solved for this direct channel, and you're only identifying 20% of your traffic, like, more data is always better. Right.
Well, I would say cleaner data is always better. But I always tell people, don't wait to start doing some of these things until your data is, quote, clean, because it will never be as clean as you want it. And especially in the B2B world, it's just by the nature of all the sort of hands that are in the middle of it, the challenges with the technologies out there, it's just never going to be, quote, right. So don't ever expect it to be. So, because if that's what's holding you back, right, then you'll never get to it, because you'll never get to that point where you feel like it's right enough. So, It's been interesting. Is there anything that we hadn't touched on yet that you want to make sure that our audience heard about?
Well, I just think, especially today in the market, you have to be able to do all this stuff and make it super, super easy for people to get started. Like, how do I just get started and experience the platform without spending any money and really low touch, self-serve configuration? And I think, certainly we've built our solution that way. And I think a lot of the, the kind of companies in the marketing analytics space, at least the newer ones, are pretty easy to get started. So that's refreshing. That, some of the older kind of solutions out there, that's not the case. So yeah, I would encourage anybody just to get started because it's pretty low friction.
Yeah, I'm excited about technologies like Channel99 and some of the others that are coming online that are helping with analytics and insights, because I think there's been a lot of limitations on it, as we've talked about throughout here. But and it's what I like, why I'm actually encouraged by where I think AI is going to take all this. So, Chris, thank you for sharing. This has been really interesting. I always love hearing these stories. If folks want to keep up with you or learn more about what you're doing or what about Channel99, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, certainly I'm on LinkedIn. Connect. We're going to be at the Mopsapalooza event, hosting a dinner. So we'll be doing a Mops leadership activity. So love to meet anybody while they're down there. And I really enjoyed the conversation, Michael.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, thank you. We'll make sure that we share that info once this gets out there. So again, thanks to Chris for joining me and sharing all this info. And thanks to our audience for continuing to support us and provide your input and suggestions. As always, if you are interested in being a guest or have an idea for a guest or topic, feel free to share with Mike, Naomi, and me. And until next time, we'll talk to you later. Bye, everyone.